The dawn of fire, August 7th, 1942. It was 2:14 in the morning when the black Pacific Ocean was split by the silence of anticipation. The sky still held no promise of light, and the waves lapped almost ironically against the hulls of the landing craft. Inside them were young men, many just 18 or 19 years old, gripping their weapons with trembling hands. The salty smell of the ocean mingled with the cold sweat running down underneath their steel helmets. It was the United States' first major counterattack in the Pacific theater, and it was starting right there on the island of Guadalcanal, part of the remote Solomon Islands archipelago. The Marines took deep breaths, trying to control their hearts, which beat like drums in their chests. Some prayed softly, others just stared into the darkness, as if they could see the future. Everyone knew that this night would mark a turning point in the war. The task seemed simple on paper: land, establish a perimeter, and push the Japanese into the jungle. But everyone also knew that in reality, no plan survived the first shot fired. The silence of the early morning was broken by a metallic sound, the clink of a bolt being locked, the click of a weapon being readied. There, among M1 Garand rifles, Thompson submachine guns, and Bar automatic rifles, was something different, something almost anachronistic, as if it had been pulled from the hands of a hunter in the interior of the United States and placed in the middle of a modern war. A shotgun,
Winchester Model 12,
but not just any shotgun. The Winchester Model 12, with its pumping action and capacity to fire 6 shots in seconds. It was not seen as a regular army weapon, but as a near brutality tool. The Marines held it with the ease of those who knew they carried a secret. The Japanese expected rifles, bayonets, frontal charges, but they did not expect that a weapon made for close-quarter killing, capable of turning a hand-to-hand confrontation into instant carnage. As the boats approached the shoreline, fear gave way to a strange confidence, because these men carried more than just courage. They brought with them a weapon forbidden in spirit, rejected by entire nations, feared even by foes who had previously tried to ban it in earlier wars. The Germans, decades before, had called the use of shotguns an inhumane act of unnecessary suffering. They had even lodged formal protests, threatening to execute any American soldier captured with one of these weapons. But the United States response was simple and harsh. If a single one of our soldiers is executed, the retaliation will be relentless. On that August night, the diplomatic protest of 1918 meant nothing. What mattered was survival. What mattered was turning the silence of the Pacific into thunder. The landing craft finally ran aground. The ramp dropped with a crash, and the Marines advanced. Boots sank into the wet sand, rifles aimed, eyes searching for enemy shadows. The sound of the waves was immediately replaced by screams, explosions, and gunfire. But amid the mechanical noise of Grand rifles, there was another distinct sound, the dull thud of the Winchester Model 12. It was different. There was no distant precision, no single shot. Each discharge was a burst of widespread death, 9 double-caliber projectiles tearing through the air simultaneously. And every time, the metallic bomb was pulled back and pushed forward again. The sound cut through the night like a warning. For those nearby, it was a reminder of power. For those in front, it was the omen of death. The Japanese had prepared for combat. Their doctrines taught them to face bayonets with bayonets, to rely on night attacks and silent infiltrations. They had learned that spiritual courage could overcome Western technology, but nothing had prepared them for this. The initial shock was not just physical, but psychological. The first encounter with the Winchester Model 12 turned beliefs into fear and confidence into despair. And that was just the beginning. The jungle still awaited, dark, dense, full of caves and ambushes. But in those first few hours, the weapon showed the world that the war in the Pacific would not be decided only by bravery, but by the brutality of those who could adapt faster. The forbidden weapon, the Winchester Model 12, was not just a shotgun. It was a contradiction in the form of steel, wood, and gunpowder. Originally intended for deer and duck hunters in the forests of America, its transformation into a weapon of war seemed a grotesque departure from its initial purpose. But in Guadalcanal, there was no room for scruples. What the Marines discovered when carrying it into combat was that this weapon could redefine the very notion of lethal proximity. Technically, its simplicity was key. A smooth action pump, a shortened barrel for mobility, and a mechanism that allowed it to fire as fast as the human arm could move. Each shell carried 9 double-caliber LED pellets, and each shot was equivalent to launching a cloud of death towards the enemy. In 3 seconds, a skilled Marine could pour over 50 projectiles into a small space, something impossible for any Japanese repeating rifle. It was a weapon designed not for precision, but for absolute impact. It didn't matter if the target was partially hidden, if the jungle camouflaged it, or if the night swallowed it. The shot from the Winchester Model 12 knew no forgiveness. It was devastation by area. It was chaos turned into advantage. And it was precisely this devastating nature that caused it to carry a stigma since World War I. In 1918, when American soldiers used shotguns in European trenches, the Germans denounced their use as a violation of the Hague Convention. They claimed that the injuries caused were inhumane, that the suffering was excessive, that there was no honor in using them against troops. More than that, they formally threatened any American soldier captured with a shotgun would be executed on the spot. The response from the United States was cold, almost cynical. If even a single American soldier were killed in that manner, the retaliation would be equivalent, but on a larger scale. No Marine was executed. The weapon remained in the arsenal. And there, decades later, in the Pacific, it returned with even more brutal refinement. The militarized version of the Winchester Model 12 featured a shortened 20-inch barrel, a heat shield to protect hands from extreme heat after continuous firing, and a bayonet lug. The most frightening detail, however, was its ability to fire in slam fire mode. This meant that the Marine could keep the trigger pressed and simply pump the action repeatedly, firing shell after shell in an almost continuous stream of fire. It was an unmistakable metallic roar, a sequence of blasts that seemed to devour everything in front of it. The Japanese, trained to value night infiltration attacks, believed that their courage and discipline would make them superior in close combats. Doctrines repeated in military manuals and reinforced by previous victories against the Chinese and British upheld this belief. They were convinced that the Western enemy was fragile when the distance disappeared. But the Winchester Model 12 was about to prove otherwise. It wasn't just the firepower, it was the psychological effect. Imagine yourself advancing through the damp jungle in absolute darkness, with only the sound of insects around you. You crawl, approaching silently, the bayonet glistening under the moon. Suddenly, a metallic click. The cold sound of the shotgun pump being pulled back and pushed forward. It's not just a sound, it's a sentence. In the next moment, a flash and a cloud of thick LET cut through the air, hitting not just one, but 3 or 4 men at once. The impact doesn't just destroy bodies, it destroys confidence. This was the true unwritten ban of the Winchester Model 12. It wasn't a weapon that killed from a distance, where death might still seem distant, almost impersonal. It killed up close, dirty, visceral, tearing through flesh and bone from just a few meters away. This is what the Germans called inhumane. This is what the Japanese were about to discover in Guadalcanal. As the American Marines marched into the jungle, with sweat soaking their uniforms and nerves on edge, they knew they carried a hidden trump card. They were no longer just young men with rifles. They were men who carried with them the weapon no one expected, and the secret was about to be revealed in its most brutal. The first test, Tanaru River, in the early hours of August 21st, 1942. Nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers crossed the Tanaru River, confident they would crush the Marines in hand-to-hand combat. Colonel Ichiki led with blind confidence, believing in the doctrine of courage over technology. But on the other side awaited machine guns, artillery, and the Winchester Model 12. The massacre was brutal. Each blast of buckshot tore through multiple bodies. When the sun rose, nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead on the sand. The belief in close-quarters combat was shattered along with their bodies. The invisible fear over time, Model 12 became more than just a weapon. It turned into a phantom of the jungle. At night, during stifling patrols, the Marine carrying the shotgun was the line between life and death. For the Japanese, the metallic sound of the pump being pulled in the dark became a nightmare. There was no way to escape. The shot didn't just hit one target, it hit anyone who dared to come. Forests and bunkers. The enclosed war, the battles, advanced into caves and bunkers. And there, Winchester revealed its most terrifying face. The Marines fired into the caves, letting the projectiles ricochet, creating deadly storms in confined spaces. The sound was described as hell roaring within the stone, more than killing. It forced Japanese soldiers to abandon positions. In the jungle, blind shots into suspicious vegetation. The breaking point in Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the rifle was used side by side with flamethrowers and explosives. The enemy hid in tunnels and caves, but there was no escape. Fire, destruction, and heavy lead came in first. Attempts to resist with improvised bamboo or wooden armor failed miserably. With each advance repelled, Japanese belief in spiritual courage transformed into despair. The weapon of adaptation, the Winchester Model 12, symbolized American pragmatism. While the Japanese insisted on tradition and honor, the Marines invented new tactics, mixed ammunition, assault teams, psychological use of bomb sounds. It was more than steel and gunpowder. It was proof that winning. The weapon of adaptation, the Winchester Model 12, symbolized American pragmatism. While the Japanese insisted on tradition and honor, the Marines were inventing new tactics, mixed ammunition, assault teams, psychological use of the bomb's sound. It was more than steel and gunpowder. It was proof that victory did not depend. The last shot, the Model 12, was never just a shotgun. It was the metallic sound of death in the dark. It was the contradiction of a war where honor did not survive brutality. Each shot reminded that, in the Pacific, it wasn't the strongest who won, but the most adaptable. And in that suffocating jungle, the forbidden weapon became a symbol of survival. Sometimes, war is not decided by courage, but by the cold sound of a bomb pulled in the dark.